The dust kicked up in golden clouds as Catherine Monroe galloped into Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, on a Tuesday morning in June 1878. And the first thing she noticed was the cowboy leaning against the livery stable who watched her with eyes the color of summer sage. She had ridden 300 miles from Denver to claim the ranch her uncle had left her in his will. A piece of land she had never seen but desperately needed after her father's shipping business collapsed and left her family with nothing but debts and broken promises. The lawyer's letter had been clear. The property was hers, but she had to arrive before the 1st of July or it would be sold to settle outstanding claims. She had 11 days to spare, and her borrowed mare was lathered with sweat from the hard ride through the high prairie. Catherine dismounted and tied her horse to the post, aware that every eye on the street had turned toward her. Women did not typically ride alone through the territory, and certainly not wearing split riding skirts that showed the practical boots beneath. She was 22 years old, tall and lean from years of helping her father in the warehouses before everything fell apart, and she had learned long ago that propriety mattered less than survival. The cowboy pushed off from the stable wall and walked toward her with an easy confidence that made something flutter in her chest, despite her exhaustion. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that would have been almost too handsome if not for the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He wore dusty denims and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up over tanned forearms, and when he smiled at her, she felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. "That is some fine riding," he said, his voice low and warm like whiskey on a cold night. "You look like you could use some water." "For you and the horse both." Catherine bristled at the assumption that she needed help, even though her throat was parched and her legs trembled from days in the saddle. "I can manage, thank you." His smile widened, showing even white teeth. "I am sure you can. But Tom here at the livery makes the best well water in 3 counties, and it would be a shame to pass it up out of stubbornness." She wanted to snap at him, but the mare chose that moment to nicker hopefully, and Catherine sighed. "Fine, water would be appreciated." He led her into the dim coolness of the stable, and she learned his name was James Bridger, no relation to the famous mountain man, but the son of a ranch foreman who had died when James was 16. He had been working at the Double Bar Ranch just outside town for the past 9 years, saving money to buy his own spread someday. He talked while he worked, drawing fresh water and helping her unsaddle the mare with efficient movements that spoke of a lifetime around horses. "What brings you to Silver Creek?" he asked, rubbing down the mare with handfuls of clean straw. "The old Monroe place. My uncle left it to me." James paused in his work and looked at her with new interest. "Samuel Monroe was your uncle, I knew him. Good man. Sad business when he passed last winter. Heart gave out while he was mending fence." Catherine felt a pang of guilt that she had barely known her uncle, had not even made the journey for his funeral. Her mother's brother had been a distant figure, someone mentioned occasionally in letters but never visited. Now his land was her only hope for a future that did not involve living on charity or making a desperate marriage to some man twice her age who would take her, despite her family's ruined name. "The place needs work," James continued carefully. "Samuel was getting on in years and he let some things go, but the land is good and the house is solid. I am not afraid of work." He studied her face for a long moment and she met his gaze without flinching. Finally, he nodded. "No, I do not suppose you are, but running a ranch alone is more than hard work. It is dangerous. Cattle thieves claim jumpers, winter storms that can kill you if you are not prepared. You thought about that?" "I have thought about everything," Catherine said sharply. "And I have nowhere else to go." The honesty in her own voice surprised her, and she saw something shift in his expression, the teasing confidence replaced by something softer and more genuine. "Then I hope you will let folks help when you need it. Silver Creek is a good town. People look after each other here." She thanked him for his assistance and paid him for the mare's care, then walked down the dusty main street to find the land office. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, confirmed that the property was indeed hers and gave her the deed and a set of keys. The ranch was 5 miles north of town, up in the foothills where the grassland met the mountains. She could ride out today and see it before dark. But first, she needed supplies. The general store was crowded with ranch wives buying flour and coffee, and they fell silent when Catherine entered. She kept her chin high and made her purchases quickly, aware of the whispers that followed her. The young widow Thompson with 3 children asked her where she was staying, and when Catherine explained about the ranch, the woman's face creased with concern. "All alone out there? You should stay in town at least until you get settled, Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house that is very respectable. I appreciate your concern, but I will be fine." The widow exchanged glances with the other women, and Catherine felt her cheeks heat with frustration. She knew what they thought, that she was foolish, unprepared, probably running from some scandal back east. Let them think what they wanted. She would prove herself through actions, not words. She was loading her supplies onto the borrowed pack horse she had rented when James appeared again, this time mounted on a striking paint stallion that danced sideways with barely contained energy. "I am heading out to the double bar. It is on the way to your place. Mind if I ride along?" Catherine minded very much, but she also was not entirely sure of the route, and pride would not keep her warm if she got lost as the sun set. "Suit yourself." They rode north together through the afternoon heat, and Catherine found herself relaxing despite her intentions to remain aloof. James talked about the land, pointing out landmarks and warning her about the creek that flooded in spring, and the box canyon where bears sometimes denned in winter. He had an easy way about him, a confidence born not from arrogance but from genuine competence, and she caught herself watching the way he sat his horse, moving with the animal as if they were one creature. The Monroe ranch appeared as they crested a ridge, and Catherine's heart sank. The house was indeed solid, a 2-story structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney, but the barn sagged on one side, the corrals were in disrepair, and the whole place had an air of neglect that spoke of months without proper attention. The fields that should have been green with hay were choked with weeds, and she could see where part of the roof had lost shingles. "It is worse than I thought," she said quietly. James dismounted and walked the property with her, his face serious as he assessed the damage. "The bones are good. The well is solid and the house just needs cleaning and some repair. Barn needs shoring up, but that is a few days' work with help. You have about 300 acres here, good grazing land. With some cattle and hard work, you could make a go of it." "I have no money for cattle." "Bank might give you a loan with the land as collateral." Catherine shook her head sharply. "No more debts. I will find another way." They walked through the house, which smelled of dust and mouse droppings. The furniture was simple but well made, and Catherine could see touches of her uncle's life everywhere. Books on a shelf, a pipe still sitting on the mantel, a faded photograph of a woman who must have been his wife, dead these 20 years. She felt like an intruder in this space, but also strangely welcomed, as if the house had been waiting for someone to bring it back to life. James helped her unload her supplies and start a fire in the stove, then checked the chimney to make sure it drew properly. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and purple, and Catherine realized she did not want him to leave. The thought startled her with its intensity. "Thank you," she said as he prepared to mount his horse. "You have been very kind." He settled his hat on his head and looked at her with those sage-green eyes. "I will ride out in a few days, check on you, make sure you are settling in all right." "That is not necessary. Maybe not, but I will do it anyway." He rode off into the gathering dusk, and Catherine stood on the porch watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she went inside, barred the door, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel overwhelmed before she started scrubbing floors by lantern light. The next weeks passed in a blur of backbreaking work. Catherine rose before dawn and worked until she could barely stand, cleaning and repairing and learning the rhythms of the land. She patched the barn roof herself, nearly falling twice before she got the hang of it. She cleared the weeds from the fields and repaired the corrals, her hands blistering and then hardening. The neighboring ranchers watched her with skeptical eyes, but slowly, grudgingly, they began to offer help. A man named Dutch brought her 6 chickens and a rooster, saying his hens were too productive. The widow Thompson sent her eldest boy out with a basket of preserves and fresh bread every week, and James rode out every few days, always with some excuse. He needed to check a fence line that bordered her property. He had extra lumber from a project at the double bar. He thought he had seen signs of cattle thieves in the area and wanted to warn her. Catherine saw through every excuse, but she never called him on it because she found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of hoofbeats that meant he was coming. They talked while they worked side by side, and she learned the shape of his life. He had been engaged once, to a rancher's daughter from Cheyenne, but she had broken it off when she decided ranch life was too hard and married a banker instead. He had been hurt but philosophical about it, saying they would have made each other miserable eventually. He loved the land with a passion that matched her own growing attachment to the ranch, and he spoke of his dream to own his own place with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Why have you not bought land yet?" she asked one afternoon as they mended fence together. "You have been saving for years. Good land is not cheap and I want to do it right. No debts, no cutting corners. Another few years, maybe I will have enough." She wanted to offer him a partnership, to suggest he could run cattle on her land in exchange for a share of the profits, but she was afraid of what that might mean, afraid of the feelings that seemed to grow stronger every time she saw him. It was late July when the race happened. Catherine had been in town buying salt and seed, and she found James in the street with a group of cowhands from various ranches. All of them gathered around a new horse that one of the double bar men had bought. The animal was a sleek bay gelding, clearly built for speed, and the men were debating whether it could beat James's paint in a race. "That stallion of yours is getting old, Bridger," one of them said with a laugh. "Time to admit he has been outclassed." James stroked his horse's neck affectionately. "Thunder has more heart than any horse in Wyoming. Age does not matter when you have spirit." Catherine found herself speaking before she thought it through. "I will race you." The street went silent. James turned to look at her, surprise written across his face. "You want to race me? Why not? Unless you are afraid a woman will beat you." The cowhands erupted in laughter and catcalls, and Catherine saw something flash in James's eyes, something that might have been respect or amusement or challenge. "All right, Miss Monroe, but what do we race for? There should be stakes." She had not thought that far ahead, but she improvised quickly. "If I win, you spend 2 days helping me clear the north field. If you win, I will make you dinner. Deal." They lined up on the main street, and someone marked off a course that would take them out to the old cottonwood tree and back, about 2 miles total. Catherine's mare was not as flashy as James's paint, but she was steady and strong, and Catherine had learned her quirks over the past weeks of hard riding. She settled into the saddle and gathered the reins, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. Someone fired a pistol and they were off. The mare leaped forward and Catherine leaned low over her neck, urging her on. The wind whipped past her face, tearing at her hair, and for a moment she felt completely free, unbound by expectation or fear. James was beside her, his paint pulling slightly ahead, and she dug her heels in and asked the mare for more speed. They pounded across the prairie, hooves drumming against the packed earth, and Catherine felt the mare's muscles bunching and releasing beneath her. She was aware of James beside her, matching her pace, and she glanced over to find him watching her instead of the course ahead. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and something passed between them, something electric and intense that made her breath catch. Then they were at the cottonwood, wheeling around in a spray of dust and heading back toward town. The mare was tiring, but she gave everything she had, her nostrils flaring red as she ran. James's paint was still beside them, not ahead, and Catherine suddenly realized he was holding the stallion back, letting her keep pace. The knowledge hit her like a physical blow, and she saw him smile, that easy, confident smile that she was learning to read like words on a page. He was going to let her win. Anger and something else, something warmer and more complicated, flooded through her. She did not want his charity, did not want him to throw the race because he thought she needed the victory or because he pitied her. She wanted to win on her own merits or not at all. She pulled the mare back slightly, refusing to cross the finish line first. James's eyes widened in surprise, and he tried to slow the paint as well. But the stallion had the bit in his teeth and surged forward, crossing the invisible line a length ahead of the mare. The crowd erupted in cheers and groans as money changed hands, but Catherine barely heard them. She dismounted and walked straight to James, who was watching her with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been admiration. "You let me win," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do. That horse of yours is faster than mine and you held him back. I saw right through your smile, James Bridger. You thought you were being kind, letting me have a victory because you felt sorry for me." His face went still, the easy humor draining away. "That is not why." "Then why?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes that took her breath away. "Because I wanted to see you happy. Because you work harder than any 3 men I know and deserve something to go right for a change. Because every time I ride out to your place, I find excuses to stay longer, and I am running out of fences to check and lumber to deliver." The honesty in his voice hit her square in the chest, and she felt her anger dissolve into something else entirely. Around them, the crowd was dispersing, heading into the saloon to debate the race, but Catherine and James stood frozen in the middle of the street, the space between them charged with possibility. "I do not need you to let me win," she said softly. "I need you to respect me enough to give me a real challenge." "I respect you more than anyone I have ever met," James said. "You rode into town with nothing but determination and courage, and you have turned that ranch around through sheer stubborn will. I let you win because I am a fool who is halfway in love with you and did not know how else to show it." The world stopped. Catherine heard her own heart beat loud in her ears, felt the afternoon sun hot on her shoulders, saw the way James's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides as if he wanted to reach for her but was not sure he had the right. "Halfway," she managed to say. A smile tugged at his mouth, tentative and hopeful. "Maybe more than halfway." She closed the distance between them and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was calloused and warm, steady and strong, and when he squeezed gently, she felt something inside her chest unlock and open like a door she had not known was closed. "Then race me again," she said. "For real this time, no holding back. What are the stakes?" She met his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there, magnified and bright. "If I win, you tell me what it is about me that made you fall in love. If you win, I will tell you the same." His smile was like sunrise, slow and breathtaking. "That sounds like we both win either way." "Yes," Catherine said. "I suppose it does." They raced again the next week, a proper race with no quarter asked or given. James's paint won by 3 lengths, and Catherine was not even disappointed because the joy on James's face was worth more than any victory. They walked their horses to cool them down, and he told her about the first time he had ridden out to her ranch, and found her on the barn roof with a hammer in one hand and determination written across her face, and how he had known in that moment that she was different from anyone he had ever met. Catherine told him about watching him work, the careful competence of his hands and the kindness in his eyes when he looked at wounded things, and how she had been halfway in love with him since that first day in the livery stable, but had been too afraid to admit it. The summer turned to fall, and James spent more time at the Monroe ranch than he did at the Double Bar. The foreman there was understanding, letting him adjust his schedule so he could help Catherine prepare for winter. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and Catherine learned the landscape of his moods, the way he hummed tunelessly when he was content and went quiet when he was thinking through a problem. He learned her stubborn pride and the fierce independence that sometimes made her refuse help even when she desperately needed it. And he learned how to offer assistance in ways that felt like partnership rather than charity. They had their first kiss in late September, standing in the north field at sunset after a long day of cutting hay. Catherine's arms ached from wielding the scythe, and her dress was soaked with sweat, and she had never felt more alive. James had been watching her with that soft look he got sometimes, the one that made her feel seen and valued in ways she had never experienced before. When she walked over to him, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You have hay in your hair," he said softly. "You have dust on your face," she replied, brushing her thumb across his cheekbone. And then somehow they were kissing, his mouth warm and sure against hers, his hands coming up to cradle her face like she was something precious. Catherine melted into him, feeling months of longing and restraint break open into something fierce and tender. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "Not halfway, not almost, completely." "I love you too," Catherine whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes. We do not have to be scared anymore. We can be scared together, which makes it easier." They made plans slowly, carefully, knowing that what they were building was too important to rush. James spoke to the foreman at the double bar and gave his notice, saying he had saved enough to start his own operation. Catherine offered him a partnership in the Monroe ranch, a legal arrangement drawn up by the town lawyer that gave them equal shares in the land and the profits. They would run cattle together, build the ranch into something prosperous and lasting. But first, they married. The wedding was in October at the small church in Silver Creek with half the town in attendance. Catherine wore a simple dress of cream-colored wool that Mrs. Thompson and the other ranch wives had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that James had picked that morning from the high meadows. He wore a new suit that looked slightly uncomfortable on his rangy frame, but his eyes when he saw her walking down the aisle were full of such love and wonder that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. They spoke their vows in voices that shook slightly with emotion, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with a tenderness that made the congregation sigh. The reception was at the town hall, with food brought by every family in the county and fiddle music that lasted until midnight. Catherine danced until her feet hurt, and James never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always seeking her face in the crowd. They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, and James carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs. That night, Catherine learned the geography of his body, the scars from years of ranch work and the places that made him gasp when she touched them. He was gentle with her, patient and careful, and when he made love to her for the first time, she felt as if she was discovering a new country, one full of pleasure and connection and belonging. The winter tested them. Blizzards screamed down from the mountains, and they spent days huddled by the fire, going out only to feed the stock and check for frozen pipes. But Catherine had never been happier. She loved waking up beside James, his warmth solid and reassuring in the dark mornings. She loved working with him, the way they moved together like partners in a dance they were making up as they went. She loved the quiet evenings when they sat by the fire and read aloud to each other or simply talked about their plans for the spring. They bought their first cattle in early spring, a small herd of 30 head that James selected with a careful eye for breeding potential. The work was brutal, but they hired on 2 hands to help with the heavy labor, young men from town who were learning the trade. Catherine proved herself as capable as any cowhand, riding fence and rounding up strays and doctoring sick calves. The men learned quickly not to underestimate her, and soon they were taking orders from her as readily as from James. The ranch prospered. By their second year, they had doubled their herd and repaired all the buildings until the place gleamed with fresh paint and solid construction. Catherine kept detailed books, tracking every expense and profit, and she had a knack for finding buyers who would pay top dollar for their beef. James managed the stock with an intuition that bordered on uncanny, knowing which animals to keep and which to cull, when to move the herd to new pasture and when to bring them in close. But more than the success of the ranch, what mattered was the life they built together. They learned how to fight fair, how to give each other space when needed, and how to come together when the world felt overwhelming. They learned to laugh at their mistakes and celebrate their victories, no matter how small. They learned that love was not just the passion of those early days, but also the steady commitment of showing up for each other, day after day, through exhaustion and frustration and occasional doubt. Catherine got pregnant in the spring of their third year of marriage, and James was beside himself with excitement and terror. He fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from doing heavy work, and she had to remind him repeatedly that she was pregnant, not made of glass. Still, his concern touched her deeply, and she loved seeing him prepare for fatherhood with the same serious dedication he brought to everything else. Their son was born in December of 1881, during a snowstorm that made it impossible for the doctor to reach them. Catherine labored through the night with only James and Mrs. Thompson in attendance, and when she finally pushed the baby into the world, she heard James's voice break with emotion as he said, "It is a boy. Catherine, we have a son." They named him Samuel after her uncle, and he had James's dark hair and Catherine's gray eyes. James was a natural father, patient and playful and completely devoted. Catherine would find him sometimes standing over the cradle in the middle of the night, just watching the baby sleep with an expression of such wonder that it made her heart ache with love. Life settled into a rhythm that was busy but deeply satisfying. Samuel grew from infant to toddler, learning to walk by holding onto corral posts and saying his first words with the encouragement of two doting parents. The ranch continued to expand, and they bought the adjacent property when it came up for sale, giving them nearly 600 acres of prime grazing land. They hired more hands and built a bunkhouse for them, and Catherine found she had a talent for managing people, earning their loyalty through fair treatment and genuine respect. James's reputation as a horseman spread throughout the territory, and people started bringing him difficult animals to train. He had a gift for understanding horses, a patience and gentleness that could calm even the most fractious stallion. He never used harsh methods, preferring to work with the animal's nature rather than against it, and the horses he trained were known for their steady temperaments and reliability. Catherine took over much of the business side of the ranch, traveling to Denver and Cheyenne to negotiate contracts and establish relationships with buyers. She dressed in practical traveling suits and carried herself with a confidence that made men twice her age take her seriously. She was no longer the desperate young woman who had ridden into Silver Creek with nothing but hope and determination. She was a successful rancher, a respected businesswoman, and a partner in a marriage that strengthened with every passing year. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1884, a screaming bundle of fury with red gold hair that came from some distant ancestor on Catherine's side. They named her Grace, and she was as different from Samuel as two children could be. Where Samuel was quiet and thoughtful, Grace was wild and fearless, climbing everything she could reach and exploring every corner of the ranch with tireless energy. James said she took after her mother, and Catherine could not argue with that. The children grew up on the ranch, learning to ride before they could properly walk, learning responsibility by caring for animals and helping with chores appropriate to their ages. Samuel was gentle with the cattle and showed signs of inheriting his father's gift with horses. Grace was more interested in the business side, following Catherine around with a notebook and asking endless questions about numbers and contracts, and how to know if someone was trying to cheat you in a deal. The years passed in a cascade of seasons, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They survived droughts and hard winters, cattle rustlers and market crashes. They celebrated good years and endured lean ones, always together, always supporting each other. The ranch that Catherine had inherited as a neglected piece of land became one of the most successful operations in Wyoming, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. But more important than any material success was the family they had built. Catherine and James grew older together, their faces weathering with sun and wind, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex than the passionate romance of their early days. They knew each other completely, the flaws and the virtues, and they chose each other every single day. On their 20th wedding anniversary, James surprised Catherine with a new horse, a beautiful chestnut mare with excellent bloodlines. "For the woman who challenged me to a race and taught me that love is about showing up honestly, not trying to fix things or make them easier," he said as he handed her the reins. Catherine ran her hand down the mare's silky neck and smiled at her husband, seeing the boy he had been in the man he had become, the easy confidence now tempered with wisdom and humor. "Race you to the cottonwood tree," she said. "What are the stakes this time?" She stepped close to him, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the lines that 20 years of laughter and hard work had carved there. "Just this, just us, just the rest of our lives together." "Best stakes I have ever heard," James said, and kissed her there in the stable yard with their children watching and laughing, with the ranch prospering around them, with the mountains rising purple and gold against the Wyoming sky. They raced that afternoon, and Catherine won by half a length, but James claimed he let her win, and she called him a liar, and they argued about it good-naturedly all the way back to the house. The truth was it did not matter who won, because they had both gotten everything they had ever wanted. A home they had built together, children who were growing strong and capable, and a love that had survived every test and emerged stronger for it. Samuel eventually married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a smart young woman named Elizabeth who shared his quiet competence and love of horses. They built a house on the far corner of the property and took over much of the day-to-day management of the cattle operation. Grace, to everyone's surprise except Catherine's, went to college in Denver and studied business before returning to the ranch to oversee the financial side with a sharp mind and sharper negotiating skills. She married late, at 28, to a lawyer from Cheyenne who was initially intimidated by the force of her personality, but came to love her fierce independence. Catherine and James became grandparents multiple times over, and their house was often full of small children who learned the same lessons their parents had learned, the same values of hard work and honesty and treating all people with respect regardless of their station. The ranch continued to prosper under multiple generations of management, and the Bridger name became synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Wyoming. On a fall evening in 1901, Catherine and James sat on the porch of the house they had shared for more than 20 years, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both in their 60s now, still active but slowing down, content to let their children handle more of the work. Samuel was in the far pasture with his sons, moving cattle to winter range. Grace was in town negotiating a contract. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it rarely was when the grandchildren were visiting. James reached over and took Catherine's hand, his fingers automatically finding hers in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the decades. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, building this life, you could have gone back east, found something easier." Catherine turned to look at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with still visible in his weathered face, in the sage-green eyes that still watched her with wonder and affection. "Not for one single moment," she said. "This life, this place, you and our family are everything I ever wanted even when I did not know enough to want it. You gave me a home, James, not just a house or a ranch, but a place where I belonged completely. You gave me the same, he said softly, and you made me earn it honestly. No holding back, no false wins. Everything we built together on equal terms. She smiled, remembering that day so many years ago when she had called him out for letting her win, when she had seen through his smile and demanded better from him. It had set the tone for everything that came after, the insistence on honesty and equality and respect that had been the foundation of their marriage. "Race you to bed," she said teasingly. James laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "I think we can both win this one." They stood together and walked into the house, his arm around her shoulders, her arm around his waist, moving in the synchronized rhythm of two people who had spent a lifetime learning each other's steps. Behind them, the Wyoming sky blazed with stars, and the ranch they had built together stretched out in the darkness, solid and lasting, a testament to what could be created when two people chose each other with open eyes and honest hearts. The story of Catherine and James Bridger became a legend in Silver Creek, told and retold with variations over the years. Some versions focused on the race, others on how she had ridden into town alone and carved a life out of wilderness and determination. But the core of the story remained the same: two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built something lasting through hard work and unwavering commitment, and who had proved that love, when given honestly and received with equal honesty, could transform not just two lives but generations to come. Their great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, running cattle on land that has been in the family for more than a century, telling stories about the remarkable woman who challenged a cowboy to a race and saw right through his smile, and the cowboy who loved her enough to show up honestly every day for the rest of his life. The ranch stands as a monument to their love, but more than that, it stands as a reminder that the best victories are the ones earned together, and that real love never needs false wins or easy answers, only the courage to see each other clearly and choose each other anyway. Catherine Monroe Bridger died peacefully in 1923 at the age of 67, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, with James holding her hand just as he had held it through decades of joy and sorrow. He followed her 6 months later, unable or unwilling to face a world without her in it. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under cottonwood trees that James had planted years before, and their headstone bore a simple inscription. Together they built a legacy. Together they lived a love story for the ages. And in Silver Creek, when people talk about what it means to build a life with someone, when they talk about partnership and respect and the kind of love that lasts, they still tell the story of Catherine and James, the woman who demanded honesty and the man who learned to give it, who raced each other through life on equal terms and found that the real prize was not in winning but in running the race side by side.